Most people in Lawrenceville today are unaware of just how rural their town used to be. Its features once those of a tiny hamlet surrounded by farmland, its people living quite literally off the land. Today we take for granted our local farm stands, never thinking that those big Jersey tomatoes, those wagon loads of sweet corn are vestiges of a tradition that was so common. New Jersey was once called the Garden State, and ever shall be as long as there are license plates. As a native of Lawrenceville, I was born here in 1964. I happen to be aware of an artifact related to this old way of life that completely escapes notice unless you know where to look. In fact, I'm sitting on it right now, and I mean this grassy tract next to the Lawrenceville Cemetery. It's actually the remnant of a country lane that generations ago ran arrow straight through the woods, over a creek, and along a dense hedgerow for almost a mile before reaching its end right behind me at 206. It provided farmers in the neighborhood of Cold Soil Road a way out from the sticks, like a long driveway accessible only to them. I understand from a former user of it, now in his 80s, that he would bounce down its length in something known as a field car, a kind of 1950s dune buggy open to the air with no doors, a motor not original to the chassis, and cracked leather seats. Parking this makeshift jalopy along 206, he and his friends would then catch the bus to Princeton and take in a movie. And I just hope it wasn't The Blob. Could Lawrenceville's heritage be any more endearingly rustic than that? I don't think so. I was so intrigued by this story that I challenged myself to map out where this country lane went and discover what traces of it remain. And I have the distinct advantage of knowing from my own memory that a good portion of it survived into the 1980s, rather miraculously given the amount of building around it. And I plucked from my family archives an old photograph taken around 1970 that captures its essential pastoral beauty. And for all I know, it may be the only photograph of this country lane that exists. I am at the top of Edgewood Avenue, right next to the cemetery and just a block from my boyhood home on the corner of Grandview and Edgewood. I'm now entering another neighborhood, Wood Lane Estates, built between 1974 and 76, and where I spent the better part of my childhood roaming over the construction site as the houses sprang up and befriending whatever kids moved in. Both factors ensuring my formative years were liberally seasoned with dirt, mud, and adventure. It was the start of the so-called housing boom, and I watched it all unfold from the vantage of this overlook, the transformation of a wide open field into this. Now I can recall that field, for this was indeed farmland, and some of my earliest, most indelible memories are of my white terrier mutt, Spot, leaping through the soybeans with leash-free exhilaration like a dolphin breaking the surface of a billowy sea. But the summer of '74 saw no soybeans planted because tilling the earth were not John Deere tractors kicking up clouds of dust, but Caterpillar earth movers and bulldozers sculpting their giant mounds of topsoil, while stakes with little streamers fluttering in the breeze marked out the first roads. And I was 10 years old. Now, just behind me, center frame, is a white oak tree, unlike any other tree in this development. All these trees were planted about 50 years ago, but this one's different, and it's pretty apparent how when you stand under it, which I am about to do. Its canopy is so much bigger, its branches spread out so much wider, and its rings, if you could count them, would attest to an age a lot older than 50 years. I like to think of it as a witness tree like they have at Gettysburg, one of those trees that's old enough to have heard the boom of the cannons. Well, this tree is old enough to have seen that field car chugging down that country lane. Just an amazing tree, towering, majestic, and rooted deep in the earth, the fitting cornerstone of a fenced-in yard. What farmer working in his field did it want shade from the hot sun while he refreshed himself from a pail of water? That's what I'd like to know. And how did it survive as a little sapling when white oak saplings are a favorite food of deer? I guess that's why trees like this need to shed 1 million acorns so just one of them will live on and perpetuate the family name. Okay, so who's next in line? Is it this little guy? So look at what's here. You have this transformer, you got this utility shed, and you have this very narrow path between yards that doesn't go anywhere. Its only purpose is to accommodate 2 different styles of fences. Would you believe that the country lane, which forms the topic of this video, once ran through this exact spot? I'm going to show you a photo from around 1970 that shows this same point when it was the opening to a long hedgerow that naturally divided the 2 fields that became these 2 developments. It will provide a stark contrast to what you see now, so prepare to be surprised. I love this photo. Such a clear window into a long ago forgotten time. Just look at all the rustic detail, the tawny sunburned grass, the dense shrubbery on one side, the trees on the other. Notice the fact that it looks like a warm day in November, perhaps after some storm, probably around Halloween, that stripped the last leaves from the trees. I think my father took this photo merely on a whim, having no idea how invaluable it would be so many years later, not only in preserving the past, but celebrating it. That hedgerow was once an extension of the grassy track I sat on in the cemetery, and it survived well into the 1980s, right up until the time this development was built. And I can't overemphasize the countless amount of times I strolled up and down its length during my so-called salad days, which begs the question, where did it go? And the answer is quite simple and sets the stage for my next stop. It went right down to an intersection with the old Johnson trolley line. I am standing at the end of Bergen Street, that long road that runs behind Lawrenceville, parallel to Main, and whose most conspicuous feature is the water tower. Now right here is the lower corner of Wood Lane Estates, and the point at which my path through the hedgerow, which I showed in the photo, emerged into the open at an intersection with the old Johnson trolley line, its tracks long since removed, but as beaten paths go, still cutting a pretty broad swath through the woods. The trolley once ran from Trenton to Princeton, and this section of it in the 1970s was a major thoroughfare for us kids, especially if we wanted to walk to Lawrenceville without taking 206. And to think we'd be out here for hours in our vast woodland escape, completely unsupervised, with no bottled water, no bug spray, no suntan lotion, and no granola bars. How did we ever survive? Now, if you took the trolley line in that direction, and I'm still talking about walking, which is how us kids got around, in a little more than a half mile, you'd come upon a quarry, long since abandoned, in which the seepage of groundwater had created a kind of bucolic pond rimmed with woods and featuring one cone-shaped slag heap on which you could perch and have the best view. And there was so much to see, a veritable carnival of humanity. It was a favorite swimming hole for hippies, their enormous pile of beer bottles and cans, contrary to the whole put litter in its place craze, and additionally it was a fishing hole for us kids. The biggest challenge? Trying to put a wriggling worm on a hook while disguising the fact you're gawking at some girl about to dive off a rock wearing nothing but her smile. Not even Huck Finn ever saw that. That quarry is now private property on which stands a pretty sizable house with a long, comely driveway complete with interlaced trees. And I think I could do a whole video on what it was like back in the day if only I could stand there and do it. The fact that I can is like trying to talk about Woodstock while being someplace other than Woodstock. So this country lane ran straight as a zip line, like it was laid out with laser precision. It had no twists and turns, and kept on going through what is now the Kingsbrook development off Cold Soil Road, which means this tangled, impenetrable mass of thickets with that lovely little maple tree front and center represents decades of neglect. The wide open, well-traveled, leaf-strewn path, which I knew as a kid, has been completely effaced by time and nature. And it's kind of a shame because this leg of the lane took you right down to the Shippatawkin Creek, and it had a major landmark spanning its waters, which went by the rather folksy name of the Broken Down Bridge. Once built to accommodate that legendary field car, by the 1970s it was a disused shell of its former self. The wooden boards which comprised its surface broken up and slowly being washed away every time the creek flooded. Having not been back to that bridge for decades, I had a hunch that a remnant of it would still exist. And so one day I set out like an explorer, wondering if I could find it and if it would be covered with vegetation like the lost jungle temple of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. And better yet, crawling with monkeys. Well, I certainly couldn't go the old route, so I am going to detour down the trolley line path through a barely discernible opening in those trees over there and preface the next stage of my journey with another stroll down memory lane.